The phone's shrill cry cut through the Ethiopian night like a blade through silence. "Doctor." Elena Reeves jolted awake in her Chicago apartment, her heart hammering against her ribs as she fumbled for the receiver. 3:17 a.m. No good news ever came at this hour. "Dr. Reeves." The voice was ancient, trembling. "This is Sister Catherine, from Debre, Libanos. I'm dying." Elena's breath caught. She'd never spoken to this woman, yet somehow the name felt familiar, like a half-remembered prayer. "The child's truth must not die with me," Catherine whispered, each word a struggle. "Sealed chamber, behind the altar, 15 centuries of lies. You must come, now, before they—" The line went dead. Elena stared at the phone, her hands shaking violently. Sarah. Her daughter's face flashed before her, those bright 8-year-old eyes asking endless questions about ancient stories, about faith, about why bad things happen to good people. Questions Elena could never answer, especially after the accident. She was booking the next flight to Addis Ababa before she fully understood why. Some truths, she realized, are buried so deep they take a lifetime of grief to unearth. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Dr. Elena Reeves had spent 30 years of her life excavating the past, but nothing had prepared her for excavating her own shattered faith. At 52, she carried the weight of loss like an archaeologist carries ancient pottery carefully, knowing one wrong move could destroy everything. 3 years had passed since the accident that took her daughter Sarah. 3 years since she'd last set foot in a church or whispered a prayer into the darkness. Sarah had been 8 years old, bright as morning sunlight, with an insatiable curiosity about ancient civilizations and sacred texts. "Mommy, did Moses really part the Red Sea?" she'd ask, her small fingers tracing pictures in Elena's research books. "Did Jesus really walk on water?" Elena would smile and say that some things required faith, not proof. Now, staring at her daughter's empty bedroom, Elena wondered if faith was just another word for foolish hope. Father Miguel Santos represented everything Elena had grown to distrust about organized religion. At 45, he possessed the kind of unwavering certainty that made Elena's stomach churn. As the guardian of Debre Libanos Monastery, he dedicated his life to preserving sacred traditions, believing absolutely that some knowledge was too dangerous for human minds to comprehend. His dark eyes held the fervor of a man who'd never questioned whether God was listening. Dr. Marcus Chen had been Elena's most promising student before ambition transformed him into her greatest rival. At 38, he possessed a brilliant mind shadowed by secret allegiances. Unknown to Elena, he now served masters who viewed ancient religious texts not as windows into human faith, but as weapons to reshape belief itself. His handlers paid generously for access to manuscripts that could destabilize established religious order. Sister Catherine Whitehorse carried blood that stretched back through centuries. Though she'd never spoken of her Navajo heritage within monastery walls, at 78, she was the unlikely bridge between ancient indigenous wisdom and Christian devotion. Her weathered hands had touched secrets that predated written history, and her dying words would soon unleash forces that had slumbered for 1,500 years. The remote Debre Libanos Monastery perched on Ethiopian cliffs like a stone prayer against the sky. Founded in the 13th century, its walls had witnessed empires rise and fall, had sheltered refugees and scholars, had kept secrets that could reshape human understanding of divine truth. Behind its altar lay a chamber sealed since the 6th century, waiting for the right grief-stricken archaeologist to break it open. The Ethiopian highlands greeted Elena with silence so profound it felt like accusation. Debre Libanos Monastery emerged from morning mist like a vision from another century, its ancient stones weathered by 1,500 years of prayers and secrets. The 20-hour journey from Chicago had left her exhausted, but adrenaline coursed through her veins as she approached the massive wooden doors. Brother Thomas, a young monk with nervous eyes, met her at the entrance. "Dr. Reeves, Father Miguel is waiting." His English carried a thick accent, and his hands trembled as he gestured toward the chapel. "Sister Catherine, she passed during the night. Her final hours were troubled." Elena's stomach clenched. She'd traveled halfway around the world chasing a dying woman's whispered words, and now even that thread had snapped. "Did she leave any message? Anything about why she called me?" The young monk glanced around nervously before pressing a worn envelope into her hands. "She made me promise to give this only to you. Said you'd understand when the time came." His voice dropped to a whisper. She spoke of chambers and children, of truths too heavy for dying hearts to carry alone. Elena's fingers shook as she opened the envelope. Sister Catherine's handwriting was spidery but determined. "Dr. Reeves behind the altar stone, 3 paces east, 2 south. Press the carved dove's wing until you hear the click. What lies beneath has waited 15 centuries for someone with your particular grief. The boy's words will either heal your faith or destroy it completely. Choose carefully. The Vatican must never know. K.W." "Where is Father Miguel?" Elena asked, tucking the letter into her jacket pocket. "The chapel. He's not pleased about your arrival." Elena found Miguel kneeling before the altar, his broad shoulders rigid with tension. Even from behind, she could see the anger radiating from his frame. When he turned, his dark eyes burned with barely controlled fury. "You shouldn't have come," he said, rising slowly. "Sister Catherine spoke nonsense in her final days. Fever dreams, nothing more." "She called me specifically," Elena replied, studying his face. "A woman I'd never met, asking me to travel across the world. That doesn't sound like fever dreams." Miguel stepped closer, and Elena caught the scent of incense and desperation clinging to his robes. "Some doors should remain sealed forever. Dr. Reeves, some knowledge carries too high a price for human souls to pay." "What knowledge?" Elena's voice echoed in the vast chapel. "What are you so afraid I'll find?" "You lost your child," Miguel said quietly, and Elena flinched as if he'd struck her. "I can see it in your eyes, the way you carry that grief like a stone in your chest. Faith dies hard in people like us. But when it dies, it leaves behind something hungry and dangerous." Elena's hands clenched into fists. "Don't you dare talk about my daughter." "Your daughter is why Catherine called you," Miguel continued, his voice gentling slightly. "She believed your particular pain might help you understand what lies beneath this altar. but I've spent 20 years guarding these walls. And I'm telling you some truths destroy rather than heal." The chapel fell silent, except for the distant sound of morning prayers echoing from the monks' quarters. Elena stared at the altar stone, noting for the first time the intricate carvings along its base. A dove with outstretched wings, exactly as Catherine had described. "You can't stop me," Elena said finally. "I didn't come this far to turn back because of your fears." Miguel's shoulders sagged in defeat. "Then God help us both," he whispered. "Because once that seal is broken, there's no going back to the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about faith." Elena waited until the monastery settled into the rhythm of evening prayers before approaching the altar. The chapel lay shrouded in shadows, illuminated only by flickering candles that cast dancing patterns across ancient stone. Her heart hammered as she knelt beside the altar's base, running her fingers along the carved dove until she found the wing Catherine had described. The click echoed through the silence like a gunshot. A section of the floor shifted, revealing narrow stone steps descending into absolute darkness. Elena's flashlight beam penetrated only a few feet before being swallowed by the void. The air that rose from below carried the scent of centuries' parchment, cedar, and something else she couldn't identify. "Sweet Jesus!" Miguel's voice came from behind her. Elena spun around to find him standing in the chapel doorway, his face pale as communion bread. "You actually found it. You knew this was here." "My predecessor told me stories," Miguel said, approaching slowly. "Legends about a chamber sealed during the reign of Emperor Justinian. I thought they were myths meant to frighten young priests into obedience." Elena descended the steps, Miguel following reluctantly behind. The narrow passage opened into a circular chamber carved directly from bedrock. Clay jars lined stone shelves, their surfaces covered in wax seals that had somehow remained intact across the centuries. At the chamber's center sat a wooden chest, its iron bindings green with age. "This is impossible," Miguel whispered. "These conditions. Nothing organic should have survived down here." Elena approached the chest with trembling hands. The lock had long since crumbled, and the lid opened with surprising ease. Inside, wrapped in silk that disintegrated at her touch, lay scrolls of parchment in remarkably good condition. The writing was clearly Aramaic, the ancient script flowing across the pages in confident strokes. "Can you read it?" Miguel asked, peering over her shoulder. Elena's expertise in ancient languages had made her reputation, but translating by flashlight in a dusty tomb was far from ideal. She squinted at the opening lines, her breath catching as the words became clear. "My name is Joshua, son of no one, age 13 summers. I write these words because Father Matthias says recording one's thoughts brings clarity to the soul." Elena looked up at Miguel, confusion clouding her features. "This isn't what I expected." "What did you expect?" Sister Catherine's call made it sound like something more significant. "But this appears to be just a child's diary." Miguel took the scroll gently, his own knowledge of Aramaic sufficient to confirm Elena's translation. "Today I helped rebuild the wall that separates our courtyard from the lepers' quarter. The stones are heavy, but not as heavy as the questions in my heart. Why does God allow such suffering? Why do good people endure while evil men prosper?" Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground air. "Miguel, look at the date." He examined the faded numerals at the page's top, his face growing ashen. This was written in 28 AD, during the reign of Tiberius Caesar, the same time period when... Elena couldn't finish the sentence. "When Jesus would have been a young man," Miguel completed quietly. "But this boy calls himself Joshua, son of no one, an orphan." Elena lifted another scroll from the chest, her hands shaking as she translated. "Yesterday I witnessed something that troubles my sleep. A man came to our settlement, calling himself a teacher. The crowds followed him like sheep, believing his every word. But I watched his eyes, and I saw something there that frightened me, the same hunger for power that I've seen in Roman officials and Jewish leaders alike. Is this what holiness looks like? Or is it merely another mask worn by those who would be kings?" Miguel stepped backward, nearly stumbling. "This can't be authentic. Some medieval monk's fantasy, perhaps. Or the parchment, the ink, the linguistic patterns, everything indicates genuine first-century origin," Elena said, though her voice carried its own uncertainty. "But if this Joshua was contemporary with Jesus, if he was questioning the very foundations of what would become Christianity..." Their eyes met in the flickering flashlight beam, both understanding the magnitude of what lay in their hands. This wasn't just an archaeological discovery, it was a potential earthquake that could shake the foundations of faith itself. The next morning brought an unwelcome surprise. Elena emerged from her Spartan guest quarters to find a familiar figure arguing with Father Miguel in the monastery courtyard. Dr. Marcus Chen stood with his back to her, gesturing emphatically at the chapel entrance, his expensive travel bag suggesting he'd arrived during the night. "The Vatican has every right to oversee discoveries of this magnitude," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying the authoritative tone Elena remembered from their university days. "Dr. Reeves may have found the chamber, but protocol demands proper ecclesiastical supervision." Miguel's jaw tightened. "No one contacted Rome. How did you even know? Word travels fast in academic circles." Marcus interrupted, finally turning to acknowledge Elena with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Elena, wonderful to see you again. I flew in from Rome as soon as I heard about your discovery." Elena felt her stomach clench with suspicion. She'd told no one except her department secretary about the trip, and that conversation had been deliberately vague. "How exactly did you hear about it?" "Marcus, I've been here less than 24 hours. "Does it matter?" He approached with the easy confidence she remembered from their student days, when she'd foolishly believed his interest in her work was purely academic. "What matters is ensuring proper documentation. These manuscripts could rewrite religious history." Miguel stepped between them, his protective instincts clearly aroused. "The discovery remains under monastery jurisdiction until proper authorities..." "I am the proper authority," Marcus said, producing official-looking documents from his jacket. "Vatican Archaeological Commission, Special Investigative Division. These papers grant me full access to any religious artifacts discovered on consecrated ground." Elena examined the documents, noting the elaborate seals and signatures. They appeared legitimate, but something about Marcus's sudden appearance felt orchestrated. "Since when do you work for the Vatican? Last I heard. You were teaching at Columbia." "Career paths change," Marcus replied smoothly. Ancient manuscripts require specialized handling, and my linguistic expertise made me valuable to Rome's research division. Over the following days, an uneasy partnership developed as they worked to translate Joshua's scrolls. The monastery's library became their makeshift laboratory. Ancient texts spread across wooden tables while centuries-old walls absorbed their heated discussions. Elena found herself caught between Miguel's protective skepticism and Marcus's seemingly insatiable hunger for information. Joshua's diary painted an increasingly complex picture of first-century Palestine. The boy wrote with remarkable insight for his age, documenting not just personal struggles, but the social and religious turbulence of his era. His entries revealed a sharp intelligence wrestling with profound questions about faith, authority, and human nature. "Listen to this passage," Elena said one afternoon, reading from a scroll they'd been working on for hours. "Today I watched the teacher they called Jesus speak to the crowds by the Sea of Galilee. His words were beautiful, full of compassion for the poor and oppressed. But afterward, I saw him accept gold from a wealthy merchant whose warehouses are built on the backs of slave labor. How can holy words flow from compromised lips?" Miguel paled visibly. This boy was actually witnessing Jesus' ministry. "It appears so," Elena replied, though her voice carried uncertainty. "But his perspective is troubling. He seems to see contradictions that the gospel writers either missed or chose to ignore." Marcus leaned forward eagerly, his pen racing across his notebook. "What else does he say about Jesus? Any details about specific miracles or teachings?" Elena continued reading. "The crowds speak of healings, of blind eyes opened and lame legs made strong. I have seen none of these wonders myself, though I have watched skilled physicians work among the people while the teacher spoke. Perhaps miracles are simply good timing and careful observation. Perhaps the divine works through human hands more than heavenly intervention." "Blasphemy," Miguel whispered, crossing himself. "Or remarkable insight," Marcus countered. "A child's unfiltered observations, unclouded by religious doctrine that hadn't yet been established." Elena found herself drawn deeper into Joshua's world with each translated page. The boy's struggles with faith resonated with her own crisis of belief following Sarah's death. His questions about suffering, about the nature of divine justice, echoed the angry prayers she'd screamed at empty skies during the darkest months of her grief. One particular entry stopped her cold. "Today, I asked Father Matthias why God allows children to die while evil men prosper. He said it was not for us to question divine will, that suffering builds character and tests faith. But what character is built by the death of innocence? What faith is proven by watching parents weep over small graves? Either God is not all-loving, or God is not all-powerful, or God does not exist at all. I fear the truth may be far worse than any of these possibilities." Elena's hands trembled as she read the words aloud. Sarah's face flashed before her eyes, bright, curious, full of questions about life and death that Elena had been too afraid to answer honestly. "This boy understood something that most adults never grasp," Elena said quietly. "The fundamental tension between faith and experience, between what we're told to believe and what we actually witness." Miguel stood abruptly, pacing to the library window. "These writings are dangerous. They undermine the very foundations of Christian faith. Perhaps they should remain buried." "Truth isn't dangerous," Elena replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Only lies fear exposure to light. Marcus's pen continued scratching across his notebook, recording every word with meticulous precision. Elena noticed he paid particular attention to passages that challenged traditional religious narratives, almost as if he were compiling evidence for some unknown purpose. As the days passed, Elena began noticing Marcus's secretive phone calls, conducted in hushed tones outside the monastery walls. When questioned, he claimed to be updating Vatican officials on their progress, but something about his manner suggested more complex loyalties. Meanwhile, her relationship with Miguel deepened into unexpected friendship. The priest's initial hostility gave way to reluctant respect as he witnessed her careful, reverent handling of the ancient texts. His own crisis of faith, carefully hidden beneath years of religious training, began to surface as Joshua's words challenged everything he'd been taught to believe. "What if we're wrong about everything?" Miguel asked one evening as they worked by lamplight. "What if 2,000 years of Christian doctrine is built on misunderstandings and political convenience rather than divine revelation?" Elena looked up from the scroll she was translating, seeing her own doubts reflected in his troubled eyes. "Then we deal with that truth and find a way to live with it. Faith built on lies isn't really faith at all." Neither of them noticed Marcus in the doorway, his phone pressed to his ear as he whispered urgently to someone in a language neither of them recognized. The smile that played across his lips held no warmth, only the satisfaction of a plan falling perfectly into place. The confrontation erupted on the 5th day, when Elena discovered Marcus photographing manuscript pages with a high-resolution camera hidden in his briefcase. She'd returned to the library early, hoping to work in the peaceful morning hours before the others arrived, only to find him systematically documenting their most sensitive discoveries. "What the hell are you doing?" Elena's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Marcus spun around, his face flushing with guilt before hardening into defiance. "Preserving history. These documents are too important to risk losing to monastery politics or Vatican censorship." "Those aren't your photographs to take." Elena stepped closer, her hands clenched into fists. "We agreed all documentation would be collaborative." "Did we?" Marcus's voice carried a coldness she'd never heard before. "Because I seem to remember you keeping quite a few discoveries to yourself over the years." "Elena, like that papyrus fragment from Syria that never made it into your published research." Elena felt her blood freeze. That fragment had contained personal details about early Christian martyrs' families, information too sensitive to publish, too dangerous for the descendants who still lived in the region. She'd made the ethical choice to protect living people over academic glory. "How do you know about that?" "I know about a lot of things," Marcus replied, his camera still in his hands. "I know you've been struggling with faith since your daughter died. I know you see Joshua's doubts as validation of your own. I know you want these manuscripts to prove that religious certainty is just comfortable self-deception." "Stop!" Elena's voice shook with rage. "You don't get to psychoanalyze my grief or my faith, and you sure as hell don't get to steal our work." Father Miguel's voice boomed from the doorway. "What's happening here?" Elena turned to find the priest standing rigid with fury, his eyes locked on Marcus's camera. Behind him stood Brother Thomas and 2 other monks, drawn by raised voices in their sanctuary of silence. "Dr. Chen was documenting our work without permission," Elena said, her voice steadier now with Miguel's support. "For preservation," Marcus insisted. These manuscripts challenge 2 millennia of Christian doctrine. Do you really think the Vatican will allow them to see daylight once they understand their implications? Miguel stepped forward, his imposing frame casting Marcus in shadow. The Vatican commissioned your presence here. Are you suggesting Rome sent you to steal from its own investigation? Marcus's laugh carried no humor. The Vatican didn't send me, Father. My employers have far more complex interests than preserving Catholic orthodoxy. The admission hung in the air like incense smoke, heavy and suffocating. Helena felt pieces clicking into place Marcus's sudden appearance, his too convenient credentials, his intense focus on the most controversial passages. "Who do you work for?" Miguel demanded. "People who understand that religious truth is a commodity like any other," Marcus replied, his mask finally slipping completely. These manuscripts aren't just historical artifacts, they're weapons. In the right hands, they could destabilize established faiths, create new movements, reshape how billions of people understand divine authority. Elena's stomach lurched as she grasped the full scope of his betrayal. "You're not here to preserve history. You're here to weaponize it. I'm here to profit from it," Marcus corrected. "My employers represent various interests, some religious, some political, some purely financial. They all share one common goal, controlling how these revelations reach the public." Miguel lunged forward, but Marcus was ready. The camera flew from his hands as they grappled, ancient manuscripts scattering across the stone floor. Brother Thomas shouted for help as the two men crashed into a wooden table, sending oil lamps tumbling toward the precious scrolls. Elena dove to protect the documents, but flames from a broken lamp caught the edge of an Aramaic text, one of Joshua's most profound meditations on the nature of suffering. She beat at the fire with her bare hands, crying out as the ancient words turned to ash. The manuscripts. Miguel broke free from Marcus and rushed to help Elena, but more flames were spreading across the wooden table surface. Marcus used the chaos to grab his camera and a handful of scrolls before bolting toward the library door. "You can't stop what's already in motion," he shouted over his shoulder. "Half these pages are already uploaded to secure servers. My employers have what they need." And Miguel tackled him just outside the doorway, sending both men tumbling down stone steps into the monastery courtyard. Elena heard the sickening crack as Marcus's head struck the ancient stones, saw the unnatural angle of his neck as his body went limp. "Oh God," Miguel whispered, kneeling beside the motionless form. "Oh merciful God, what have I done?" Elena rushed from the library, leaving Brother Thomas and the other monks to battle the flames consuming 15 centuries of preserved history. She found Miguel cradling Marcus's head, blood seeping between his fingers as he whispered prayers in rapid-fire Spanish. "Is he alive?" "But barely," Miguel said, his face pale as communion bread. "Brother Thomas, call for medical help. Quickly." As the monastery erupted into controlled chaos, monks forming bucket chains to save the remaining manuscripts, others preparing to transport Marcus to the nearest hospital, Elena knelt beside her former student's broken body. His camera lay shattered on the stones beside him, its memory card scattered in pieces across the ancient courtyard, but the damage was already done. Marcus's final words echoed in her mind, half the pages already uploaded, his employers armed with centuries-old ammunition for whatever war they intended to wage against established faith. Elena looked up at the smoke rising from the library windows, knowing that Joshua's voice, that honest, questioning child's perspective on divine truth, might now be twisted into something he never intended. The boy who had simply wanted to understand suffering was about to become a weapon in conflicts he could never have imagined. The irony cut deeper than any blade in trying to preserve truth. They had handed it over to those who would use it to destroy. The helicopter's rotors chopped through morning air like mechanical vultures as it carried Marcus's unconscious form toward Addis Ababa's main hospital. Elena watched from the monastery courtyard until the aircraft disappeared into clouds, leaving behind only the acrid smell of aviation fuel and the weight of consequences that felt heavier than stone. Inside the library, the devastation was complete. 3/4 of Joshua's manuscripts had been reduced to ash and charred fragments. Brother Thomas knelt among the ruins, carefully gathering what remained into metal containers, his young face streaked with tears and soot. 1,500 years, he whispered repeatedly. 1,500 years, gone in minutes. Elena examined the surviving fragments, her heart breaking with each incomplete sentence. Joshua's final entries, the ones that might have provided crucial context about his ultimate fate, had been consumed by flames meant to preserve sacred spaces. Only scattered phrases remained. My 17th year brings new understanding, and perhaps suffering is simply. The rest was ash. Miguel emerged from the chapel, looking like a man who'd aged a decade overnight. His hands, still stained with Marcus's blood, trembled as he approached Elena. The hospital called. Marcus is alive. But he paused, struggling with words. Severe head trauma. They're not certain he'll wake up. Maybe that's for the best, Elena said, immediately regretting the bitterness in her voice. I'm sorry. I don't mean that. It's just. I know. Miguel sat heavily on a stone bench, his shoulders sagging under invisible weight. I keep telling myself I was protecting the manuscripts, protecting the monastery. But the truth is simpler and uglier. I lost my temper. I let anger override judgment. And now a man might die because of my failure. Elena studied his profile, seeing not the rigid priest she'd first encountered, but a man wrestling with the same human frailties that Joshua had documented centuries ago. You were trying to stop him from stealing our work. Was I? Or was I trying to stop him from exposing truths I'm not ready to face? Miguel's voice cracked. Those manuscripts challenged everything I've built my life on. Every prayer I've offered, every sermon I've preached, every moment of certainty I've felt about God's love and justice. Joshua's words cut through 2 decades of seminary training like it was tissue paper. Elena sat beside him on the cold stone, both of them staring at the smoke-stained library windows. What happens now? Now we face the consequences. Miguel said, the Vatican will want answers about Marcus's presence here, about the manuscripts, about why their commissioned investigator is lying unconscious in an Ethiopian hospital. Church authorities don't respond well to complications. And the surviving fragments. Miguel was quiet for a long moment. Protocol demands they be transferred to Rome for proper study. But after what we've witnessed. He shook his head. I'm not certain proper study is what they'll receive. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. You think they'll suppress Joshua's words? I think they'll do whatever serves institutional stability over historical truth. The Church has survived 2 millennia by adapting to challenges, by absorbing or eliminating threats to doctrinal authority. A first-century child's skeptical observations about Jesus could be seen as exactly such a threat. The weight of loss pressed down on Elena like physical force. First Sarah, torn from her life by random chance and mechanical failure. Now Joshua, silenced again after 15 centuries by human greed and institutional fear. The parallels felt too cruel to be coincidental. "He was just a boy," she said quietly. A child trying to make sense of a world full of suffering and contradiction. His questions weren't attacks on faith, they were expressions of it. He cared enough about divine truth to wrestle with its implications. "Like you do," Miguel observed. "Like we all do, if we're honest." Elena's phone buzzed with an incoming message. The sender was listed as Memsi, Marcus's initials. Her blood chilled as she opened it. "Elena, if you're reading this, my insurance policy activated. Everything's already in motion. The fragments you're mourning were never the real prize. Check Catherine's cell, 3rd stone from the window. M." Her hand shook as she showed Miguel the message. He planned for this, even unconscious in a hospital bed. He's still playing games. Miguel read the message twice before standing abruptly. Sister Catherine's cell was sealed after her death. If Marcus found something there, they ran through monastery corridors like children fleeing punishment, their footsteps echoing off ancient stones. Catherine's cell stood exactly as she'd left it, sparse, humble, containing only the basic necessities of monastic life. But following Marcus's directions, Elena found the 3rd stone from the small window slightly loose. Behind it lay a hidden compartment containing a single scroll, perfectly preserved and tied with red ribbon. Elena's hands trembled as she unrolled it, revealing text in Catherine's own handwriting, not ancient Aramaic, but modern English. The first line made Elena's legs give out. "To whoever finds this after my death." Joshua's real diary was never in the sealed chamber. What you found were copies, made to protect the truth from those who would destroy it. The authentic manuscripts have been hidden for 70 years, waiting for someone with the right grief to understand their true message. Elena's world tilted on its axis as Catherine's words sank in. Everything they'd fought over, everything that had nearly cost Marcus his life and had consumed irreplaceable historical documents in flames, all of it had been an elaborate deception spanning decades. "This can't be real," Miguel whispered, reading over her shoulder. "Sister Catherine was dying when she called you. Why would she orchestrate such an elaborate ruse?" Elena continued reading Catherine's confession, her voice growing steadier as the full scope of the truth emerged. "I am the great-granddaughter of Mary Whitehorse, a Navajo woman who served as translator for Catholic missionaries in the 1890s. Through her bloodline, I inherited guardianship of manuscripts that my family has protected since 1943, when they were smuggled out of war-torn Europe by a Jewish scholar fleeing the Holocaust." The letter went on to explain how Catherine's grandmother had hidden the authentic Joshua scrolls in a cave system beneath the monastery, accessible only through passages known to her indigenous ancestors who had worked these lands long before Christian missionaries arrived. The sealed chamber beneath the altar had been deliberately created as a decoy, filled with carefully crafted copies designed to draw attention away from the real treasure. She knew someone would eventually come looking, Elena realized. All those academic papers I published about first-century manuscripts, my expertise in Aramaic texts, she'd been watching my career for years, waiting for the right moment. Miguel paced the small cell like a caged animal. But why you specifically? Why not contact Vatican scholars or established religious authorities? Elena found the answer in Catherine's next paragraph. Dr. Reeves. I chose you because you understand loss in a way that academic scholars cannot. Your daughter's death broke something essential in your relationship with divine authority. Just as Joshua's experiences broke his childish assumptions about God's nature, only someone who has screamed questions at an empty sky can truly hear what this boy was trying to say. Tears blurred Elena's vision as Catherine's words cut straight to the heart of her grief. Sarah's face materialized in her memory, bright, curious, asking those impossible questions about fairness and divine love that Elena had never been able to answer satisfactorily. There's more, Miguel said gently, taking the letter to continue reading aloud. The copies you found in the sealed chamber were created by my great-aunt in the 1950s, based on fragments of the original texts. She was a skilled calligrapher and had access to period-appropriate materials. The goal was never to deceive scholars permanently, but to provide a buffer against those who would exploit Joshua's authentic words for political or financial gain. Elena felt pieces of a 70-year puzzle clicking into place. Catherine knew that genuine first-century manuscripts questioning Christian doctrine would attract exactly the kind of people Marcus represents. So she created a test anyone who came seeking to exploit or destroy religious truth would be satisfied with the copies, while someone genuinely seeking understanding would eventually be led to the real documents. But how could she predict that Marcus would reveal his true intentions? Miguel asked. Elena found that answer in the letter's final pages. Human nature is predictable. Dr. Reeves. Those who seek truth for its own sake respond to ancient wisdom with reverence and careful study. Those who seek to weaponize knowledge reveal themselves through impatience, secrecy, and violence. And I trusted that the manuscripts themselves would expose the difference between seekers and exploiters. The letter concluded with detailed directions to the authentic hiding place, accompanied by a hand-drawn map showing cave entrances concealed among the monastery's foundation stones. Catherine had even included modern photographs of the location, taken secretly during her final months when she realized her death was approaching. She planned all of this, Elena breathed. Even her own death was timed to set events in motion. The phone call, bringing me here just as the copies were ready to be discovered, knowing that word would spread and attract people like Marcus. Miguel studied the photographs Catherine had left behind. These caves extend far beneath the monastery. Some of these passages look natural, carved by underground rivers over millennia. Elena stood on shaking legs, Catherine's letter still clutched in her hands. We have to go down there. The real Joshua's diary is waiting. Elena, Miguel's voice carried gentle caution. What if the authentic manuscripts are even more challenging than the copies? What if Joshua's real words destroy whatever faith you have left? She turned to face him, seeing her own fears reflected in his troubled eyes. Then at least I'll know the truth. I'm tired of believing in comfortable lies. Miguel. Sarah deserved better answers than the ones I gave her about why bad things happen to good people. Maybe Joshua found better answers, or maybe he found better questions. They gathered flashlights and rope from the monastery's supply room, telling Brother Thomas they were investigating structural damage from the recent fire. The young monk accepted their explanation without question, too overwhelmed by manuscript restoration efforts to probe deeper. The cave entrance Catherine had photographed lay hidden behind a loose stone panel in the monastery's wine cellar, concealed so skillfully that centuries of monks had never suspected its existence. Elena's flashlight beam revealed a narrow passage sloping downward into absolute darkness, its walls bearing tool marks that looked far older than the monastery itself. These passages were here long before the first Christian missionaries arrived, Miguel observed, running his fingers along carved symbols that predated Aramaic script. Catherine's indigenous ancestors knew about these caves. Elena felt history layering upon history as they descended Navajo wisdom, protecting Christian revelation. Ancient indigenous knowledge serving as guardian for Jewish refugee scholars' desperate preservation efforts. The complexity of cultural and religious intersection made her head spin. After 20 minutes of careful descent, their flashlights illuminated a circular chamber carved from solid rock. Clay vessels lined stone shelves, their surfaces bearing seals that looked authentically ancient, not the careful reproductions they'd found in the decoy chamber above. In the center of the room sat a wooden chest identical to the one they'd discovered days earlier, but this one radiated an authenticity that the copies had lacked. Elena approached it with trembling hands, knowing that whatever lay inside would either heal her shattered faith or destroy it completely. The authentic Joshua scrolls felt different in Elena's hands, heavier somehow, as if they carried the weight of genuine human experience rather than careful reproduction. The parchment bore the subtle imperfections of real age, and the ink had faded in patterns that no forger could authentically replicate. Most importantly, the handwriting showed the natural evolution of a child growing into adolescence. Subtle changes in letter formation that spoke of years passing between entries. "This is it," Elena whispered, her voice echoing in the underground chamber. "This is really his voice." Miguel held the flashlight steady as Elena began translating the first scroll, her expertise in ancient Aramaic allowing her to navigate Joshua's evolving script. The opening entries were similar to those they'd found in the copies above, but with crucial differences that changed everything. "My name is Joshua, son of Miriam, an unknown father, age 13 summers," Elena read aloud. "I write these words because the questions in my heart grow too heavy to carry alone. And Father Matthias says that recording our thoughts brings peace to troubled souls." The difference was subtle but profound. This Joshua wasn't a complete orphan, but a child born outside traditional marriage, carrying the social stigma that such circumstances brought in first-century Palestine. His questions about divine justice weren't abstract theological puzzles, but personal struggles with shame and belonging. As Elena continued reading, Joshua's authentic voice emerged with startling clarity. This wasn't the skeptical observer they'd found in the copies, but a deeply spiritual child wrestling with profound questions about the nature of love, suffering, and divine purpose. "Today I saw the teacher called Jesus speaking beside the Jordan River," Elena translated from a middle section. "His words about loving one's enemies struck my heart like lightning. When the crowd dispersed, I approached him with trembling legs. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to see straight through to my soul. And he said something that I will carry forever. 'My child, the questions that trouble you are not signs of weak faith, but evidence of deep love. Only those who care about truth wrestle with its implications. Miguel's breath caught audibly. He actually spoke with Jesus personally. Elena nodded, her eyes scanning ahead to find even more remarkable passages. The teacher asked about my parentage, and when I explained my mother's situation, tears filled his eyes. He told me that God's love flows most freely to those whom society rejects, that my birth circumstances were not shame but blessing. For the first time in 13 years, I felt worthy of divine attention. The flashlight beam wavered as Miguel's hands shook. This isn't skepticism, this is testimony. Joshua wasn't questioning Jesus' authenticity, but documenting personal encounters with him. Elena continued reading, her voice growing stronger as Joshua's story unfolded. Unlike the copies above, these authentic manuscripts revealed a boy whose faith deepened rather than wavered through his adolescent years. His questions evolved from doubt into sophisticated theological inquiry, guided by direct conversations with Jesus himself. Jesus explained that miracles aren't violations of natural law, but expressions of divine love working through human compassion. Elena read from a later entry. When I asked about the healings I'd witnessed, he smiled and said that every act of kindness heals something in the world, that every moment of genuine love resurrects something that seemed dead. The real miracle isn't supernatural intervention, but the capacity of broken hearts to choose love despite pain. Elena looked up at Miguel, seeing her own wonder reflected in his face. This changes everything. The copies above portrayed Joshua as losing faith, but the authentic diary shows him finding it in the most profound way possible. Miguel sat heavily on a stone outcropping, overwhelmed by the implications. Catherine knew. She understood that the real manuscripts would strengthen faith rather than destroy it. But she also knew that people like Marcus would never be satisfied with that kind of spiritual truth. They wanted weapons, not wisdom. Elena continued reading Joshua's final entries, her heart breaking as she realized why Catherine had been so protective of these particular words. The boy's last written thoughts weren't about doubt or theological controversy, but about hope. Hope that his questions had led him to deeper understanding. Hope that future generations would find similar peace through similar wrestling with divine mystery. I am 17 now, and I understand finally that faith isn't the absence of questions, but the courage to ask them in love rather than anger. Elena read through tears. If anyone finds these words after my death, know this, the God I have come to know through my questions is far more beautiful than the God I inherited through tradition. 3 months after returning from Ethiopia, Elena stood in the chapel of St. Mary's Home for Children in Chicago, watching 8-year-old Hope practice reading from a picture book. The little girl's Ethiopian accent mixed beautifully with English words as she sounded out each syllable. Her dark eyes bright with the same curiosity that had once lit Sarah's face. The adoption papers had been finalized just last week, but Elena knew the real healing had begun in that underground chamber when she'd heard Joshua's authentic voice speaking across 17 centuries. His questions hadn't destroyed her faith. They'd rebuilt it on a foundation strong enough to bear real grief and genuine hope. Miguel had resigned from his position at Debre Libanos, using his inheritance to establish the Miguel Santos Memorial Research Center for Ancient Texts. Together, they were preparing a careful, scholarly edition of Joshua's authentic diary. ensuring his true message of faith deepened through questioning would reach seekers rather than exploiters. "Mama Elena," Hope called, using the name that still made Elena's heart skip with wonder. "This story says love never dies. Is that true?" Elena knelt beside her daughter, remembering both Sarah's similar questions and Joshua's hard-won wisdom. "Yes, sweetheart. Love finds ways to continue, even when everything else changes. Sometimes it just takes new forms we didn't expect." Hope smiled and returned to her reading, while Elena silently thanked a first-century boy whose questions had ultimately led her home to hope itself.